we're seeing like a couple of generations now that are coming in and able to vote for the first time, and they're either voting far left or far right, something that's happening everywhere in the world, basically. Brazil with Bolsonaro to even like what's happening in Israel, what's India, like it's basically happening everywhere.
Today's guest is Stan Arom, an independent video journalist, creator of the award-winning documentary How Iran Targets Activists Everywhere. In this episode, we dive into Germany's shifting political landscape, the rise of fascism, the debate around conservatism, free speech challenges in Germany, Elon Musk, and much more.
What defines a far-right party?
Things that favor hierarchy, and left wings is things that favor equality.
Elon Musk. What does he want? Why is he messing up with Europe and Germany specifically? Why is he supporting the AfD?
If you do some research into Elon Musk's family history, you get some really dark connections there. I think for most of his career, he didn't really think of that. But I also think there's something more sinister at play.
Stan is also the creator of Barely Informed, a YouTube channel covering European politics and investigative stories.
If they want to avoid a kind of like French Revolution, like guillotines lining the streets kind of moment, which like, I don't particularly want to go in that direction, but all the same things that the Nazis blamed as like societal problems that are orchestrated by the Jews are still the same things that the far right today obsesses over. The direction that things have been going in the last few years with just the concentration of wealth in the hands of very, very few billionaires, whether it's in the US or in Europe, is clearly something eventually is going to break there.
We want to thank one of our sponsors for supporting this podcast. Wonder Tax is a platform that makes your tax declaration in Germany easy. Try it out for free and only submit if you're fully satisfied. Visit gutentag.wondertax.de and give it a try. Now, without further ado, let's start with the conversation.
Stan, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Stan, recently we had the elections in Germany. What do you think we learned about these elections?
That's a lot in a question. I think so. My thoughts, I don't know if this really answers your question, but the thing that has been sticking with me since the election, which I don't know when this is going to come out, but at this point, the election were 2 days ago.
Yeah.
What's been sticking with me is the AfD slightly underperformed based on what they were expected to do in the polls, very slightly. And when I was like live monitoring the results, I was slightly relieved with that. The people that we were discussing it were all relieved. And it was a very strange feeling to be relieved that the AfD doubled their result from last time, that they're the second biggest party in Germany. And the world that we live in is like, well, it could have been worse. Yeah. And that is the thing that has been sticking with me, because we're so conditioned, especially after what happened in the US, of right-wing parties overperforming their expectations, that even though the expectations are so incredibly bad, and the fact that they're underperforming still puts us in a horrible situation in basically every country on earth right now. We're still like relieved when we barely avoid disaster,
If you're thinking also in another way, how this bipartidanism actually really is not good. For example, what we see in the UK or in the US, that you only have two options. Mm-hmm. In Germany, if Germany will only have two parties, then it would have been, let's say, the right-wing party or like the extreme right party, because it would be CDU and AfD wouldn't have been distinguishable. Yeah. And somehow the people would have just vote for one side of the wing and the other people for the other one, and then we would have a very far-right government if it would be the case. And that's what I like about Germany, that you have in a more granular spectrum, different options.
Usually that's how it is supposed to work in a parliamentary system, but then you look at the UK and that's changing now with Reform, I guess, the Reform Party, but traditionally they've only had like two main parties and like a few side parties that were basically not really significant in the grand scheme of things. But I think what we're seeing right now, and we're seeing it's mostly driven by young voters, is that there is a rejection that is becoming more and more consequential. And I'm not just speaking about Germany here. As new voters come onto the scene, people become 18 and like turn 18 and they start to be able to vote. And we're seeing like a couple of generations now that are coming in and able to vote for the first time. And they're either voting far left or far right. And so as older voters are dying out and new voters are coming in, we're basically seeing a hollowing out of the center of the political spectrum.
And why do you think that is happening?
My theory right now would be the capitalist order that our parents have essentially benefited from, at least in Europe and North America, is reaching a breaking point everywhere, and it's becoming increasingly obvious. And voting for centrist parties is just voting for business as usual, which is, which worked 30 years ago, worked 20 years ago, but now we're starting to really see that system break down, and we're starting to see all the negative consequences of it. We're starting to see kind of the chicken coming home to roost from decisions that were made 30, 40 years ago. And we realize that if we continue in the same direction, if we don't make some like very significant shifts, that's...
So like they say, if we vote something more to the center, we're just voting for the same thing. Nothing will change. If we want a radical change, we need to pick the radical party, either left or right.
Yeah. And like I'm not trying to paint them as like equally valid in both directions. I'm sure we'll talk about that some more. But yeah, I think definitely the need for a radical change is driving this like kind of extreme polarization of younger generations for sure.
Hey, what's up, guys? Sorry to interrupt this amazing show, but I need a bit of help. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see the subscribe button. If you do, it would mean the world if you can subscribe. It's the best way to support the show. Because when you subscribe, I can show it to potential guests and brands and stuff like that. And it really helps to grow the podcast. Have cooler conversations, cooler guests, and it helps really a lot. So if you don't mind, thank you so much. Now let's get back to it.
Some people say that the result of these elections is the coming back of the right. Mm-hmm. Is it a very right-wing government, what we are expecting in the future?
I think what we're expecting right now is a grand coalition. My understanding is it's going to be something along the lines of CDU, SPD, Greens, but it's going to be like a CDU-led government.
However, some people say that, or claiming that SPD or Grüne have gone to the right. I feel like that's a position that is being taken by people who is too far on the left, and then they consider everything a bit to the center that is too far to the right.
I mean, I think there's some truth to the fact that the rise of the AfD is driving basically every party, or almost every party, towards trying to find rich white right-wing policies they can adopt to not get too many of their voters to like bleed out to the AfD is what I think is happening. So that was literally visible in the campaign that we just saw, where in the case of the CDU, like they're doing a very, very right-wing shift, where they're having campaign posters with airplanes that are like, they're not saying remigration on the campaign posters, but they're definitely hinting at it. We had a CDU politician, what's her name again? Julia Klöckner, I think.
Yeah.
Who did a Twitter post that was like, oh, you don't need to vote for the AfD because we'll do all the same things. We promise. Please stay with us, Yeah. So that is very, very evident with the CDU. I think centrist parties are seeing the kind of the center of gravity of the political spectrum shifting towards the AfD, and they're trying to like limit that. Exactly, to appeal, to find in what way they can appeal to those voters without losing too much of their identity. And that also leaves an opportunity for a party like Die Linke, like you have the BSW, Sarah Wagenknecht, also doing like, oh, it's left-wing but conservative at the same time, and it's this weird mix of these two ideas, and that kind of leaves a vacuum for the Linke to say, well, this is our space and we can kind of do this,
Yeah. What Sarah Wagenknecht party was a weird combination. It's hard to say what it was, because in some policies or some of the proposals were maybe identified with the right, some others were like left. So, but sometimes I feel like the terms right and left are a bit falling behind because we cannot define them very well.
I have a video on that actually.
Yeah.
No, so right wing is things that favor hierarchy, and left wings is things that favor equality. And that's not necessarily to say like hierarchy bad, equality good. Like sometimes hierarchy is a good thing, and sometimes equality, if it's taken too far, can like paralyze everyone and make it impossible to do anything,
Mm.
Like, have you ever been in an organization where like there's no boss and everyone is at the same level? Like, you can't do anything there in that case, And so it's not a matter of saying this is bad, this is good. It's a matter of finding the right balance between those two. And I think that's a useful way of looking at this right wing, left wing thing, because it's the case when it comes to like, if you're favoring corporations, that is going to favor like corporate hierarchies, but it's also going to favor income inequality, which is a form of hierarchy as well. And it's the same thing with like left wing social policies that try to like lift the floor by sometimes lowering the ceiling a little bit, like taxing the rich is something that is going to go in that direction. So I think oversimplifying that the way that, especially in the US, they say, it's big government versus small government. Not really, because you can have a big government that is spending a lot of money on doing very right-wing policies of, like, but it's the reason why something like, fascism or like the Nazis were right-wing, even though they were like a big authoritarian government, because they had this like essentialized racial hierarchy of their second-class citizens and all of that. And that is like clearly like hierarchy at the most basic form,
Big government, I would assume. I mean, I don't think that it was a very, in a way, libertarian what Mussolini or what Hitler did. I mean, those were institutions, governmental institutions that were very, as you said, hierarchical and very authoritarian. So this fallacy that they say small government is what the right wing wants is a bit like confusing when they try to sell it like that, because I feel like what Trump is trying to do, in my opinion, is they try to do the government smaller so he can rule more.
Yeah,
that's the only
sense,
yeah. You did also some videos about fascism in France, and I don't know if there's some parallels in what is happening in Germany, if we're seeing the same kind of patterns in what happened with the National Front in France.
I think we're seeing these patterns happening, I would say, especially all over Europe. I think the rise of the far right is obviously something that's happening everywhere in the world, basically, from Brazil with Bolsonaro to even like what's happening in Israel, India, like it's basically happening everywhere. You could argue, if you go down to like some of the basic defining characteristics of fascism, you can argue that even the Chinese government have like some very strong like ultra-nationalist fascist tendencies and ultra-conservative tendencies as well. But in terms of European far-right parties, I think for example, it's an interesting parallel to have the National Rally, the AfD, and the Brothers of Italy all have a woman leader. And that's an interesting thing of, like trying to have this external face of the party that is that is a more acceptable to moderate voters kind of figure. Yeah. Like if the AfD had like Björn Höcke as the face of the party, I don't think they would be getting 20% of the vote right now.
Yeah.
But I think in politics, especially for right-wing parties that have this image of like it's what they say about Alice Weidel all the time. It's how can this be a far-right party? She's a woman and she's a lesbian and in relationship with an immigrant. So it's impossible that this is a far-right party, even though like that same person has been advocating against gay rights and against immigration. Sorry, I bumped the microphone. I hope that didn't mess up the sound. Against gay rights and against immigration for her entire career, but it serves as an easy argument for people who don't want to think about it for too long to go like, oh, that makes sense to me, that therefore this is not a far right party,
What defines a far right party?
Well, I guess it's a question of where you put the line between where you put the line between like right wing and far right. So what defines fascism comes down to three characteristics. The main one is something called palingenetic ultranationalism. Ultranationalism being like the nation is like the most important thing. It's above basically all of your other responsibilities. And palingenetic is the return to the nation's like great former past, its natural state, if you will. So palingenetic ultranationalism is the kind of things that you hear when someone says, make America great again, for example, is like very typically palingenetic ultranationalism. And then another aspect of that would be just an authoritarian version of that. I guess you could have palingenetic ultranationalism without necessarily being authoritarian, but like you have authoritarian, palingenetic ultranationalism are the three characteristics that makes a far right party. And when you read, for example, Björn Höcke's book, you have that just all over the place, and it's all in different forms and in different formulations of those things. And it's things like when he talks about, I don't have the exact quotes in mind, but it's something like the longing of the German people for a historical figure who will restore order and overcome division, and like that kind of like, very clear like authoritarian approach to things. He also says that small reforms or like little changes are not going to be enough, and it's going to be like the German absolutism in the promise that we will tackle the problems like fundamentally, and those kinds of discourses are things that you can hear, that you could hear those in political rhetoric in a bunch of different ways. Yeah, when it comes to the point where it's also like pitting the majority of the population, usually in Europe, it would be like the white population against immigrants, whether they're migrants, whether they're, second generation immigrants or third generation immigrants, like some of the things that we're seeing with this whole remigration debate.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just being white, because now it's like being ethnically German now, because Ukrainians are white. And now there's this feeling, why are we giving so much money to Ukrainians?
Yeah.
Why are we taking so many refugees from Ukraine? And that kind of feeling is like, okay, it goes beyond just being white is okay.
Yeah, and that goes back to like the ultranationalism part of it, yeah. And then like the palingenetic ultranationalism part of it is I don't know if you've noticed, I'm in the wrong sides of the internet, man. I don't know if you've noticed that like every neo-Nazi has either like a Roman statue or like a Renaissance statue as their profile picture or something like that. Like that is the calling back to the great past of, even if it has had nothing to do with their country. It's like, it's Rome, it's not Germany, but they have this, like, they always try to connect themselves to like, or it's the Vikings or it's something like that, that kind of hearkening back to what they perceive as this great past to their heritage, their great heritage, when it's very funny that when they're calling back to like the Roman Empire or like ancient Greece, those societies were like super gay, man, like incredibly gay and incredibly gay friendly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny that they always imagine it to be a certain way when the reality of those eras that they call back to are completely different from what,
like they
what
were
they
real
think.
men.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I can imagine, because of the line of your content, you get a lot of angry people commenting, right? Every time I have some topic also in my content, something that is a bit more left leaning, I get a lot of hate comments from people who have like a Viking or a Roman or a warrior in their profile picture,
or like who have like a 88 just by coincidence in their profile, in their pseudonym. Yeah.
How do you navigate touching those topics and doing content out there?
It doesn't really get to me. Sometimes it's funny because sometimes they just have like really, really, really stupid arguments, and other times it's more of the thing it's more exhausting to have like bad faith arguments that are, that it's not like you can completely address them in one sentence. Like, for example, the Nazis were really socialists. Is something that they would say, and like you can address that if you have 5 minutes, you can fully destroy that idea. But the problem is you do it once, and then like 5 videos later, they come back with like 15 people saying the same thing, and you're like, well, go watch that video, but they don't go watch that video. So do you have like redo the argument like 15 times in this comment section, and the next video it's going to be the case again? Like it's just like, so eventually you just stop answering and you just ignore him. But
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people started to repeat the argument that Hitler was a leftist.
Yeah,
after Weidel said it.
Exactly.
And I don't know the arguments that they want to take to back up that that statement.
Yeah, I mean, it is like in that conversation with Elon Musk, it was especially funny because Elon Musk was like, "Yeah, they nationalized like crazy." Like, no, they didn't actually. They privatized a bunch of industries. Like I I read this, and I'm not sure how true it is. I think it might be a little bit misleading, but I read that the word privatization was coined to describe what the Nazis were doing. I think the word privatization existed before what the Nazis were doing, but I think it became a much more commonly used word to describe like the Nazi policies of privatizing industry.
To take state-owned resources and start to giving it to their friends.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But the funniest one to me is if the Nazis were socialist, why do neo-Nazis today only associate with the far right? Why do we not like look at Die Linke or, you know, like that La France Insoumise and see like a bunch of Nazi connections there if they were really leftist? That only ever happens with the AfD, with the National Rally, with like these types of really far right parties. So that just like, even if there was a historical argument to say that the Nazis were leftists, it's not, even if that was the case, which it isn't, it is not relevant to politics today because now the alliances are very, very, very clearly on the far right. Like, it was very funny that Alice Weidel said that in that conversation with Elon Musk as the party, the AfD, was debating separating themselves from the Young Alternative in part because of their ties to neo-Nazis. And it's like, well, how can these two things be true at the same time?
Yeah.
Like, our party actually had documented ties to neo-Nazis, but that's not our ideology because the Nazis were leftists. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Maybe they take it out of it was a collectivist movement. Maybe that's the reason why they would say it was a left movement. I don't know if that's the argument they will take as well.
Yeah, it would be like, it would go back to like government control is what they define as leftist.
Okay.
In some cases. So like, I guess that's part of how they argue it. They even say, yeah, they privatized. So they gave, like corporate, like, you know, previously nationalized companies to private people that are their friends, but the government still had control over those because they were like close to power, and therefore it was still like government controlled industry. And that's what their argument would be for like, that was therefore kind of like a, you know, a communist or socialist thing, but it doesn't really hold water.
Yeah. No. And what do you think guys like this want, like Elon Musk? What does he want? What is he messing up with Europe and Germany specifically? Why is he supporting the AfD?
I think the easy answer is money. Is like, that would be number one. Like, you don't get $400 billion by accident. Like, you have to really, really want it to get that much money, and so that's, you know, apparently that's not enough, you know. So he wants to have like more control, especially in Europe, where it's like he's having more of a hard time with European regulations when it comes, for example, you don't see any Cybertrucks here because like the Cybertrucks do not pass European regulations. Like, those edges on that car are just going to slice someone in half.
Yeah.
And European regulations will not allow that to happen. So I think he would like to have more influence in European politics so that he can start to influence that. But I also think there's something more sinister at play, which is that there is a genuine overlap in ideology. I think for most of his career, if you do some research into Elon Musk's family history, you get some really dark connections there. I think for most of his career, he didn't really think of that. It didn't seem like he had much interest in politics. And for most of his career, he was kind of like this, you know, centrist, center-left, kind of like Obama kind of Democrat, center-left in American context, not in European context, but like kind of Obama Democrat. He didn't like unions, but that's not exactly uncommon in the US. But like, his distaste for unions was really the only thing that made him political for most of his career. And I think what happened was around 2020, multiple things happened at the same time. He got really angry at money, like the pandemic costing him money. He got surrounded by a bunch of very, very far right, like actual neo-Nazi people like what's his name? Jack Posobiec is like a proper proper, basically neo-Nazi guy
Who's Jack Posobiec?
He's allegedly he's the person who operates the End Wokeness account.
Okay.
He's someone who's very, like, many times did like tweets that contained 1488, which was it's a neo-Nazi code number. 14 being the 14 words, the white supremacist slogan, and 88 being the eighth letter of the alphabet is H. So HH being something that we're not allowed to say here.
Probably not.
And like he's not the only one. Like you see, like even in the like 19, 20-year-old children that are running Doge in the government right now. I think there's like two of them. One of them tweeted a bunch of things about how he wanted to normalize Indian hate, how he wanted a eugenic immigration policy in the United States, how he was racist before it was cool, how you can't pay him to have was it mate out of his ethnicity or something like that. And there's another person in like the same team of basically children who like retweets Nick Fuentes, who's an American neo-Nazi, and other like very, very far right figures. You have someone called Peter Sweden, who I think he's from Norway, even though his name is Peter Sweden, and he's also a UK citizen, but he has a very like thick Norwegian accent. This is a guy who has deleted a bunch of tweets where he's like, I'm not a Nazi, but Hitler actually had some really good points. Or how are the what's the anti-Semitic, like the fake document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a complete Nazi fabrication. Like, oh, how is this anti-Semitic? You know, like a bunch of things that he used to tweet, and that he deleted a bunch of those. Then he apologized for having said them. And then he deleted the apology, and now he says, "Oh, these are all like photoshops. I never tweeted them. These are just like leftist smears against me." And like these are the kinds of people that Elon Musk like surrounded himself with over like since the pandemic, basically. And I think a third thing that really probably had probably a therapist would want to look into this is how much of an impact his daughter coming out as trans had on his politics and on his political worldview. But what we see now in the things that he's obsessed with, and probably this has been the case for a long time, because like you don't get 15 children by accident. Or is it 12 or 15? I think it's 15 now.
Yeah, recently was another one, so I lost count.
I think the latest one is 15, but we
can double check very quick just so we don't mess it up. Elon Musk, how many kids? 13.
13?
And Vanity Fair published 5 days ago.
Okay, so 13, yeah. So it was 12, now it's 13. That doesn't happen by accident, and like his obsession with birth rates, his obsession with will often tweet about like he'll like retweet accounts that talk about the connection between race and IQ, and he also apparently would be. I think there's a few interviews where he talks about how he would be interested in having a company that has to do with genetics. But it would be complicated to do that, because how do you do that while avoiding the Hitler problem is the quote that he has, you know.
Oh, really?
Like, well, maybe you avoid the Hitler problem by like not trying to mess with genetics, you know, like that could be an idea, but yeah. No, it's like there's I think there's a lot of if you analyze the things that he's obsessed with when he tweets, whether it's population replacement which is a big like Nazi conspiracy theory, like it.
But is he tweeting about that? I haven't heard about those topics.
Oh yeah, he like there's an account that he retweets almost every day called, I think it's called the Rabbit Hole, the Rabbit something, that is constantly tweeting either birth rate statistics, sometimes race and IQ statistics. Oftentimes they also tweet about things that are really funny. There's not particularly, I mean it's political, but not in the same way. Of this account tweets how the experts, like, you know, like university professors or experts in domains all tend to be Democratic. Mm-hmm. And to them, that is the proof that like academia is a left-wing propaganda machine, where it's like, maybe if the experts are on the left, it's because the left is correct on these topics. That might be one thing. It's kind of like when they say, when Mark Zuckerberg was like, oh yeah, the fact checkers are like super biased because they always correct right-wing sources and not left-wing sources. Like if fact checkers are finding more problems with right-wing sources, it's maybe because right-wing sources are more problematic, you know?
Yeah. It's this. Yeah, exactly. A good point. It shows they're not biased. They're just like a reflection of what actually is out there. So if there's more bullshit on the right, it's because
It's if there's more bullshit on the right, it's not biased to find more bullshit on the right. Yeah.
And then the big replacement theory that sometimes comes across on YouTube, some person telling you why the population in Europe is going to be replaced by I don't know whom, and this whole migration is a conspiracy from the elites to replace all European population and Islamize, or how you call it, to convert everyone to Islam or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that is like genuinely, that is straight Mein Kampf stuff. Like that is straight from there that it came. Yeah, like the thing is, they'll hide it a little bit, and I think so. I'm not sure how much of it with Elon Musk is conscious. For example, when he's talking about voter replacement, like, oh, they're importing immigrants into the country to replace voters. I'm not sure how much of that is a actual conscious reference to Great Replacement Theory, but you can definitely see the parallel there. You know, this is the same way, like when he's tweeting about birth rates, how much of that is, a worry about the white birth rate? Like, I'm not in his head. I don't know. There was one tweet that I'll get back to like the Great Replacement Theory in a second, but there was one tweet that was maybe one of the most explicit tweets that Elon Musk had, which he himself called the dumbest tweet he ever made, which is someone basically said something along the lines of, I'm tired of Nazis like not acknowledging that they're Nazis. Like if you have these positions, just like own them. And then someone replied to that, basically saying, "Yeah, okay, fine, I'll own that I'm a Nazi." But like saying, "Yeah, okay, fine," and then saying a big like Jewish conspiracy theory thing. And Elon Musk replied to that with, "You have said the actual truth." And he got super criticized for that. And he I think the tweet is still up, but he has really regretted that one a few months ago. But it's kind of funny that a few months ago he was like, "That's the dumbest tweet I ever made," and then a few months later he's like doing a very famous gesture on stage. You know, it's like,
was that the tweet that after that tweet he flew to Israel and met Netanyahu to show like,
That's exactly the one.
Yeah, and then months later he did the Roman salute, they say, or he will claim, and then Stephen Bannon did the Elon Musk salute, you might say.
Because, and there's a Mexican actor who did one at the same event as Steve Bannon. Yeah,
I did.
I forget his name. If you look for
Mexican actor Hitler salute,
Hitler salute. But yeah, no. To get back to the Great Replacement Theory and those kinds of things, I think it's extremely interesting to look at. And this is coming up in like I have a part of this in my next video that I guess will probably be out by the time this interview is out. Is that I think most people have, and this was the case for myself as well, have an oversimplified view of what the Nazis believed about the Jews. Like to me, when I learned about it when I was in school, it was just like, oh, the Nazis didn't like the Jews. They thought they were greedy and that they controlled the banks and whatever, you know. It was kind of this vague thing where the idea of the Nazis like controlling everything, the Jews controlling everything, was that they were undermining white Western civilization by orchestrating mass immigration to replace the white population, and also disincentivizing white births by making it acceptable or trying to influence the culture so that it's acceptable to have race mixing, and so that more gay people are accepted, so that gay couples wouldn't have children. And that's the big conspiracy theory of like, oh, they're actually controlling the culture so that white people have fewer children while bringing in immigrants.
And probably they will also say they don't adapt to our culture.
That too, yeah.
They live in their own communities.
But like,
they don't speak our language. They speak some sort of their own version of German.
But if it was just that, if that was the conspiracy theory, I like, for example, that would be the case of the Amish, and I don't think you see, like, in the U.S., I don't think you see like a big anti-Amish movement in the U.S. I think the idea that the Jews were, like, scheming to undermine Western society was the which is, like, has a big history unfortunately in Europe. But that was the thing. And what's really interesting is, like, you look at the rhetoric coming from a lot of far-right parties about, like, mass immigration replacing people, or, when they have very reactionary views against homosexuality, when you see this is less explicit by political parties, but online movements like the online right that doesn't even necessarily consider itself far right, but that is just, like, gamer, like, right-wing gamer culture, get, like, irrationally angry every time they see, like, a multiracial family in a video game or in a cartoon or something. And it's like all the same things that the Nazis blamed as, like, societal problems that are orchestrated by the Jews are still the same things that the far right today obsesses over. They just don't openly blame it on the Jews. Like, they're the open, explicit anti-Semitism aspect of it is now, like, kind of hidden away. There's still all the underlying problems. They'll still be, like, the things that they focus on. And when you ask them, where is this coming from? Like, what do you think is the source of these problems? They'll say it's George Soros, who happens to be Jewish, but I'm sure that has nothing to do with why they, or they say it's the WEF and it's Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the WEF, also Jewish. And so they'll say it's, like, the elite Jews, or, like, they'll say it's, like, specific category of Jews. I think Steve Bannon, in the same speech where he said, or, like, very recently in a different speech, could have been in the same speech, I'm not sure, where he did his Nazi salute, he was also talking about how the enemy of civilization, or the enemy of the West, is the Jewish elite, or something like that, or some, like, I'm probably getting it, like, slightly off, but it's, like, Jews something. But it's not like all of the Jews, it's just the elites.
Yeah. Well, Mark Zuckerberg also is.
Yeah, and he's Jewish, so it's, like, one of those weird things, like, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is a Nazi, but it's interesting that Meta's lawyer, who dropped Meta as a client, says that one of the, like, the reason why he dropped Meta as a client is because Mark Zuckerberg went into, like, neo-Nazi into a neo-Nazi rabbit hole, I think is the way that he put it.
Is he? This is a very hard claim, isn't it?
Yeah, I saw the same thing. I looked into it a little bit, and the lawyer hasn't said that much about it. Like, he hasn't, like, substantiated fully why he said Nazi. So it's hard to say exactly where that comes from. But when, like, this was at the time where it was slightly before the Hitler salute, I think it might have been right after. But, like, I was, like, on full alert of, like, starting to see Nazis everywhere. And so when that lawyer came out saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm dropping Meta as a client because Mark Zuckerberg is a fucking Nazi," I was like, him too? Like, what the fuck? Where are there no Nazis? Like, I don't even know where not to look.
I feel like he's just trying to appeal to the powerful man in charge, because he said in one of the he said in his book, Donald Trump, that he will put Mark Zuckerberg in jail. Or maybe that was the reason why Mark Zuckerberg suddenly took the shift. And he did it with Biden, or with the Democrat administrations. He always tried to lean or to appeal to the power, to the person in charge.
Yeah, I mean, I think he said it in his, like, the announcement that he had of getting rid of fact checking on Facebook. He said, like, this election is a tipping point, culturally speaking. And I think, in a lot of ways, I think he's right. I think the right has had a very strong tipping point in terms of, all of a sudden, like, there's so much the mask has come off for so many people on the right at this point. And I think Mark Zuckerberg is leaning into that, and even if he doesn't believe it himself, which, again, I'm not in his head, I don't know, the fact that he's dropping, like, all of the gender stuff from Facebook and all of the restrictions around what kind of slurs you can use to insult trans people, like, now that is basically fully open. Like, it's open season on trans people. It's open season on immigrants on Facebook now, basically, according to internal training documents, at least.
Of course, you saw the whole thing, Kanye West Super Bowl thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was like also proving a point if we just go too far on like, yeah, let people express, no restrictions, no censorship, then you're going to have some crazy rapper who comes up with that and says openly, I'm a Nazi.
I mean, it's funny because Kanye West, I don't know if people forgot this. Like so there was basically he had a mental breakdown a few months after his divorce, where he started there was that moment where he's like, oh yeah, I really blame a lot of my problems on my doctor, and I'm not going to say the race of the doctor. It was a Jewish doctor. There's like wow. That was the same sentence, like he had a 2-second break, and then he said he was a Jewish doctor, and then he had said a bunch of like very, very like
I don't know if you watched the podcast episode with Lex Friedman.
I was thinking about the one that he did. I think it was before that with Alex Jones.
Okay.
Where he had a hood, like he was completely covered.
Oh yeah.
And in that interview, he was like, "But I love Hitler." Like he would just like say it openly. I love Hitler.
Oh really? Wow.
It was just a really weird. Like clearly, he's diagnosed officially as bipolar, I think.
Yeah, I mean, people don't take him seriously anymore when he says stuff like that.
Yeah, it. I don't think Nazism is a symptom of bipolarity in the same way that I don't think that people blamed autism for Elon Musk's salute. I don't think Nazism is a symptom of autism either. I don't think Steve Bannon is autistic or bipolar when he does his Nazi salute. But in the case of Kanye West, like there's clearly something. I think the Kanye West thing is more sad than it is. Than I would say is for Elon Musk, because there's clearly something wrong with Kanye.
Yeah, there was people like saying, I don't know, why are we not putting so much focus on what he did, because he did like this store where he only had one t-shirt with a swastika. I don't know why we're not talking about it. And I think everyone, I also thought, I don't think you need to pay so much attention, because I think the guy is just mental.
I think he's having a mental breakdown. He's been having a slow mental breakdown for a long time, and it like has ups and downs.
And I think it proves a point also that you cannot say just freedom of expression like that and nothing will be censored. It goes through. There is a limit. There is always a limit.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the J.D. Vance thing that he had at the Munich Security Conference, where he complains about freedom of expression in Europe, and like, can restrictions on freedom of speech sometimes go too far? Yeah, I think the UK sometimes go a little bit too far on that. I wouldn't be able to give you a specific example, but I do. If I were to like look into it again, I would be able to find some examples. But like generally speaking, when people are complaining about freedom of speech in Europe, my question would be, okay, what would you like their freedom to say? Like, what would you like to say now that you can't say?
And, there's this thing about conflict in the Middle East that some people want to say the G word, but if they say it, they might get in trouble.
That's Germany specific. Yeah. That's a very German specific thing, which I do think is bullshit. Yeah, what's happening here with that is crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, I do believe that that freedom of expression doesn't mean freedom to insult, but freedom of press, that I have it in a different standard. Freedom of press should be at the top. So if you're a journalist and you're doing investigation, no one should be able to shut you down. So, and then freedom of expression, we can discuss what you can say or not say. But if you are someone whose job is to inform people, you should be able to expose and be fact check, meaning you cannot lie, that you're under a different standard. Because I don't know. I like the fact that things go under the defamation law. If you're telling something about someone and it's not true, and you're telling that intentionally, then it's defamation, right? Should be taken legal action. But other than that, I don't know what you cannot say that you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, so Germany has some things about, you can't do a Nazi salute here, or you can't say, like Björn Höcke. has been sentenced and had to pay fines. I think he's appealing, so he might not have paid the fines because there's an appeal process. But for using a Nazi slogan twice in his speeches. There's a very funny thing, by the way. The Nazi slogan that he used is alles für Deutschland.
Oh,
everything for Germany, which was part of the SA, the paramilitary branch of the Nazi Party's oath or slogan or something like that. And what is very funny is that he was sentenced for using that in his speeches, but there are also photos of Alice Weidel giving speeches in front of a big banner that says Alice for Deutschland.
Oh, really?
Which is like, honestly, that's genius at that point. It's like the level of creativity that they have of like kind of telling the authorities to go fuck themselves, essentially. Like, yeah, we'll do our dog whistles and you can't do anything about them because they're always like slightly deniable enough that, you know, you can explain them as, oh, Alice for Deutschland is a perfectly fine slogan. Her name is Alice and she's for Deutschland, you know.
Interesting word game. Yeah. Clever. But do you think a lot of people now, and a lot of turning to the right, are tired of the narrative that only left wing can be good people, or playing this good people kind of game? Is it possible that, is it bad to be right wing?
No, there's a lot of assholes on the left, and there's like, you know, if you spend enough time, and you don't even have to spend that much time in left-wing circles, like there's a lot of really huge assholes on the left as well. I think there's a tweet that summarized it that pretty well, which is like, it was someone saying, hey, right-wingers, I get it. Like, I get annoyed at left-wingers all the time too, but I don't let it define my entire worldview. There are people who literally define, like, they let their disagreements with left-wingers, especially like very far left-wing people who can sometimes have like very crazy positions, as, you know, that is the thing that builds their entire reactionary worldview of making them right-wing. I think there's ways to be conservative and not be a bad person. And, you know, I think, for example, if you're a woman and you want to be, you know, a trad wife, as they say, you know, you want to find a husband who will take care of you, who will provide for the family, and you will do the homemaking and raise the children, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I don't think anyone would see anything wrong with that, as long as you're not trying to impose that on other people. And the same thing, if you're on the left and you're trying to impose the opposite of that on women and saying women should not be raising the children at home and being, you know, taken care of by their husband or whatever, I think that's also like you know, the whole point is like you should have the freedom to make those choices.
Would be a conservative person.
Yeah, like I think if you're being conservative for yourself and you're making conservative decisions for your own life, I don't think I don't know anyone reasonable who has a problem with that. I think the problem is when you're trying to impose that on other people.
But it's a hard thing, because every person who has a way of thinking, they think that their way is the way that needs to be. A conservative might say, you know, alcohol is bad for you, and then I'm going to lobby to ban it, to ban it, or to restrict it, or to do everything possible, because I think people should not drink, my children should not drink, my community should not drink or get drunk. So it's hard to not to try to expand the way you think. Also, same thing on the left. If you think a certain way, let's go into the topic, what is a woman, and defining a woman, and the discourse goes for many years already, and they want to try to redefine what it is. And then the conservatives, they will try to impose also their way of thinking, and it's a endless battle.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that's the thing, is like, I don't know if this is how you plan for this conversation to go, but it doesn't matter. But that's the thing, is like, for example, for trans rights, it's like, I don't know anyone on the left who's trying to make right-wingers trans, you know? I think they're just fighting for their right to be who they are. Whereas the right is trying to fight against their right to be trans, to have access to, you know, trans healthcare or hormone replacement therapy, or all of those things. So that is a pretty fundamental difference. I would like to know what kind of there's probably examples of this, but what kind of freedoms the right is, well, freedom of expression, freedom to be a Nazi and like say Nazi things would be an example that left-wingers say, I don't think you should have the freedom to say Nazi things, and so that would be an example. But in terms of like lifestyle choices, I think the right tends to be way more restrictive with things like abortion. And I think the argument around abortion about like where life starts, and if you should consider like ending an abortion when the fetus is still inside of the mother, to be, does that qualify as murder? Is like, I can see the complexities. I very much fall on the side of like, I'm very much in favor of abortion, but like, I can put my mind in like the mind frame of someone who sees that doing an abortion is murder. And so that's one where I actually can understand, even if I disagree with, why that is something that they would want to impose on other people. I find it crazy that they want to impose things like things like making it impossible to be trans, for example, or that they would want to the gay marriage thing seems to be mostly behind us, the debate about gay marriage, because we've had gay marriage for a long time in most European countries at this point. And I think most reasonable people realize that the sky didn't fall, so that's one that, but there's still people on the right who want to go back on that. And I would like, those are the kinds of things that I was like, why? If it doesn't affect you, I don't understand. The abortion thing, again, like that's one where I can conceive of the complexity of it.
Would be the difference or the line when people are doing something because that's what they think it's the right thing to do, and when you go to the far right or far left, if far right or far left is when you add the factor of hate on it. So you might say, I am not in favor, I do not support abortions because I believe that the right thing is to bring someone to the world and give the opportunities and not to kill it. And it's very different than someone who says, I don't like migrants because I think they're inferior to us. Or I don't like them because they're just all of criminals. Or I don't know, to give social help to poor people because if they cannot hold themselves up with their own, by themselves, they should not exist. I think when you're starting to build your belief system out of hate, maybe it's when you are like,
there's a nuance there with, I think modern far-right people don't necessarily say, for example, that migrants are inferior. Sometimes they do, but what they will tend to say is just that they're like inherently different. And they'll say like, I don't have a problem with people from Africa. I just think that they should go back to Africa. Like they just want to resegregate the world, basically. And they just think that there's like fundamentally, sometimes they'll even say like at a genetic level, like a difference that makes that someone from Algeria should not be considered like Dutch or German, even if they're born here and if their parents were born here. And they just want those people to go back to where they came from. In a lot of cases, like it doesn't even make sense to talk about where they came from because sometimes they're like, their four grandparents came from different places, so like where do you, where?
For me, that's the more Nazi idea behind behind the whole debate currently in Europe, because how German do you have to be a real German? Wasn't that the question back then with the Jews? How many generations you had to prove that you're not a Jew? It's the same thing.
In the U.S., it's the same thing with like KKK type people or like just white supremacists. It's called the one drop rule. If you have one drop of black blood, meaning if you can trace back your family tree and any person in your ancestors is black, then you do not pass the one drop rule. That is the test. And there was a very famous TV show where they did genetic tests on neo-Nazis or white supremacists in the US, and they found that this one guy it was like 15% African or something, and he got like very upset at that. Like very, very upset at that. It was really funny.
There's a reason why still the US is the biggest power in the world, and it's because they are able to take the smartest people, or even not only the smartest people, but sometimes maybe not the more qualified people come to the country, but they raise a child that becomes someone very brilliant in the States, and that person is considered an American. And while in Europe, we're still discussing who is a real French or who is a real German, who is a real Dutch.
I'm not sure I agree with you on that, because I think like there's. Have you seen the film Gangs of New York?
Yes.
Like you watch that film and you realize that was like, was it the like late 1700s or so? I don't remember when the film is set. Probably more recently than that. There was already like a very strong nativist movement, and even like the Civil War, around slavery, around considering black people citizens and them having the right to vote. There's always been like a very strong like white supremacist history in the U.S. as well. I think one of the big differences of why the U.S. is so powerful and why Europe doesn't seem to be as focused on that is, up until this point, and maybe that's going to shift with the current rise of the far right that we're seeing in Europe, but in the modern context, the U.S. has gotten to this point because they were focused on power and because they were focused on capitalism and like building up like the most powerful companies in the world. And Europe has been, since World War II, has been the region of the world that is really pushing for like having minimum standards for human rights, having minimum standards for worker rights. Obviously, you can have a lot of criticism for the EU in a lot of other ways. It is, a capitalist organization. It's a trade union at the end of the day, but it is a trade union that is imposing like the strongest standards for workers to have rights and things like that. That makes it harder to build a successful company. If it's harder to exploit your workers, it's harder to be successful as a company. And so it's about like different priorities there. Yeah.
If Uber would pay better to their drivers, Uber will not be as big.
Yeah.
If all the food delivery will have the, how do you call them, the riders as real employees, the company will not be as profitable.
Amazon and all of that.
Yeah. That's a good point. If we go, I mean, it looks like this is the tendency. Like Europe is voting more far right. People is trying to lean more to the right or the far right. What do you think comes after some years out of this?
So, okay, I don't know, you might have seen this one. I made a video not long ago that was pointing out how there seems to be a new talking point among far right people, which is the problem with Hitler is that he wanted to expand, and that if he was just a nationalist and if he just wanted to take care of his own country, that would have been fine. What is the argument that we're seeing from like many people on the far right? First of all, like there's a reason why far right movements tend to have this like need to hate and to want to expand, because like it kind of collapses on itself if it doesn't have an enemy to turn the population against. But for example, you look at Franco in Spain, and like that was one of the longest lasting fascist dictatorships in Europe, in part because he was mostly focused inwards on Spain. And it lasted for like 60 years or something.
Yeah, until he died.
Yeah, basically. And so, not even basically, until he died. And so maybe this is one of the lessons that, today's far right learned from history, is how to make a longer lasting fascist movement. And that is possibly one direction we would go in. I think I'm very frustrated with, so you have far left parties, people who vote for like Die Linke or La France Insoumise in France, or parties like that, get very upset when you call them far left parties. But like in the modern political context, you can consider them far left because there isn't really much to their left in electorally viable parties. And those are, whether you want them to be or not, those are relatively fringe. They're gaining support, but not as fast as the far right. I would like to, and then you have like center-left parties like the SPD that is kind of going towards the center, or like the Socialist Party in France, or like the PSOE in Spain, that are kind of like going towards like being like actually like centrist and not that much of a leftist element to it. I would like to see something in between those two that has kind of a balance between those two sides, basically. Like have some of the reasonable ability to compromise of the center left and has the guts and the balls of the far left is what I would like to see. Will we see that? I don't know. I think that's the kind of thing that would be able to recapture a lot of the voters who are looking for where to vote right now is, and I'm mostly speaking for myself, like that's the kind of party that I would like to see and that I'm not seeing really pop up anywhere. So if that were to start to be a movement that really existed, I think that's the kind of thing that would gain some traction, but only time will tell.
To be honest, I was very comfortable with the previous government, when Merkel was there, and we had CDU, SPD, the big coalition, because it was like that balance. The CDU pro-industry, while also had the SPD trying to, okay, let's try to fight for a minimum wage or rent controls or something for the worker class. So because at the end, if you want to subsidize a lot of benefits for the citizens, you need an arm where the money is coming into the country. So I thought, okay, you have the industry needs to flourish, and that surplus you need to spend it or put it on the people. That was for me the way I perceived it. But where do you put the money at the end is either you put it in the hands of a very few or you put it back to the people, and that's the thing that sometimes we're missing.
And you look at the direction that things have been going in the last few years with just the concentration of wealth in the hands of very, very few billionaires, whether it's in the US or in Europe, is clearly something eventually is going to break there. And if they want to avoid a kind of like French Revolution, like guillotines lining the streets kind of moment, which I don't particularly want to go in that direction, but eventually we're going to get to something that looks like that. So if they want to avoid that, maybe there needs to be some measures to prevent that level of concentration of wealth, for sure.
I wanted to know actually about your documentary. What was the story behind this documentary you did together with your colleague?
So it was like I guess you could call all of my videos on YouTube documentaries, but like that one has like more of a documentary vibe to it, but I more thought of it as another video that we were making. What happened basically is I had started my channel. I'd made 2 videos. I think this is the 3rd video that we made. And Ida, my colleague, approached me and said, "Hey, I really like what you do. I have an idea." And Ida is from Iran. I expected her to pitch an idea that was like very Iran focused, and I was trying to do stuff about Europe. So I was like mentally prepared to go there and say, and like let her down gently and say, "Hey, sorry, this is not within my level of competence." And then she pitched like a really interesting story of these Iranian activists in Europe being cyber attacked and being, even being sometimes physically threatened or harassed or things like that. Like all of these problems that are happening, and European governments warning Iranian activists about how they're being targeted by the Iranian government. And I was like, okay, this covers like all the things that I'm interested for on my channel, like authoritarian governments and this like and activism and human rights and all of that. And so yeah, we just went for it. Ida did a lot of the research and the heavy lifting and writing the story, and she's like one of the main characters in telling the story because she talks about her own experience in Iran when the Women Life Freedom movement started, and she was still a student there. Was she a student? I think she was still a student there. She was in Iran when it started to happen, at least. Wait, was it the Women Life Freedom? It was a different protest movement that was happening when she was a student. My bad, because the Women Life Freedom is very recent.
She said one that it was before the Arab Spring.
Yeah, it was. I think it was around that time. It was when I think it was the re-election of Ahmadinejad. Like there was a very big pro-democracy, like anti-Ahmadinejad protest movement around that election because the vote results were very suspicious. Now that you remind me, yeah. So we shot that and we put it out. It didn't do too well on the YouTube channel. And then Ida proposed that we pitch it at a documentary film festival that was documentaries about journalism. which, this one was, this one involved us as well to some extent, because like we're talking about activists being cyber attacked and having their accounts hacked and everything. And as soon as we start to reach out to these activists, our accounts start to get hacked and we start to get problems as well.
Really?
Which, coincidence, maybe not. I have no idea. Like, we'll never know.
Is that the reason where your LinkedIn is empty? Because you said it was hacked?
Still. I haven't had the time to redo but for about a week, my LinkedIn was a Chinese woman who had completely deleted all of my information,
Really? Wow.
put up fake information, fake profile photo, and started to like send scam messages to all of my contacts. And when I managed to get control of my LinkedIn again, I tried to work with LinkedIn to like restore my previous accounts. And they said, sorry, we don't store anything, so you can just delete all of the fake information that's there. And I now need to like redo manually like all of my work experience, and I still haven't done it yet.
Coincidence.
So I'll never know. My Facebook was hacked, and there's a whole other story of what happened to my Facebook account, which
Wow.
Basically they managed to like take control of it. And then they froze the account by uploading a photo of Osama bin Laden, which triggered some kind of like automatic thing with Facebook that basically, even once I got control of my account again, it was like restricted. And so the hackers were in like the Facebook business side of my Facebook account, and I couldn't modify I didn't have the admin rights to kick them out of that because of the restrictions that were on my accounts because of the Osama bin Laden photo.
Wow.
So it's like so many that happened, and like it's still happening to this day. So many of my separate accounts, like things that tiny applications that no one should even know that I have an account on. Like I almost every week I get like, did you request a new password? Here's your code to reset your passwords. Like, how do I tell the app that I didn't reset this password, and please like do not let anyone access to this thing? They just say, if this isn't you, ignore this message. And I'm like, that doesn't feel like it's enough.
Yeah.
That's like that's my life now, is like every week something like that. But anyway, so we submitted that documentary to the film festival, and like the journalism aspect being like us as journalists, coincidence or not, also happened to be like a bunch of victims of a bunch of cyber attacks. And yeah, we won that award. And we were also selected for a few other festivals that are like happening at the moment. A small handful of mostly online festivals in the last couple of months.
Were you scared about releasing that documentary?
Yeah, I mean it's part of journalism.
Yeah.
It's the kinds of people who like run into war zones or things like that are. Again, it's always a matter of like, for example, if I ask for myself, would I do that? And that would be a whole other topic. But like to me, the main thing that has prevented me from going to Ukraine, for example, is not necessarily for myself. It's more like, it's basically my mom said, hey, if you die doing your job, I will never forgive you. And that's a big argument. So, I am always like, if I need to cover a story like that, where there's going to be literally like, the risk of me being drone bombed or something like that, it really needs to be something that is incredibly worth it, that isn't already reported by a bunch of other people. And I also need to have to be able to take so many of the possible precautions. So, for example, there's something that I promised myself that I would. I haven't told my parents this, but the deal that I made with myself is that I won't go to a war zone without doing what's called a hostile environment training, and that is pretty expensive.
What is that?
It's the obviously journalists goes to a war zone. It's not just for journalists. Like there's a bunch of other kinds of people who get these trainings. But if a journalist goes to a war zone, it's not safe, but they get like a certification of like bare minimum things that are kind of there to like try to minimize the risk or maximize their awareness of what they could do better. So it would be things like first aid training, basic thing, or just there's different types of trainings for like war zones or civil unrest. But if you go to like a riot, it would be things like awareness of your escape routes if you need to, of staying on the edges of the crowd rather than being in the middle of the crowd, because if you're in the middle of the crowd and you can't go anywhere. Those kinds of like, there's a bunch of different things. It would be if you're living in a country that is unstable or that has a lot of, either gang activity or things like that, where there's possibility of you being kidnapped. Whether it's like, I know that that's a big problem in Latin America as well, but it would also be, for example, be like the journalists who were kidnapped by ISIS, for example, would be a thing. It would be awareness of not having a routine. So not leaving your home every morning at the same time, not always taking the same route to get to work, avoiding to like not necessarily going to the same building to work every day. Being unpredictable as a way of making it harder for them to follow you, basically. There's a bunch of like different things, and like because I still haven't been able to afford to do a hostile environment training, there's a lot of things that I don't know.
They're quite expensive.
Yeah, it's like the one that I'm interested in, because it involves a lot of cool courses. It's not necessarily the fanciest or the most recognized one, but it's one in Italy that's a couple of $1,000 or a couple of thousand euros, and I don't have 2,000 euros to spend on that right now. As a struggling YouTuber, it's not within my budget. Yeah,
you're doing YouTube full time then now, funding it with your own resources and with your Patreon supporters, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And any plans in the future? Where do you see this project in the next 3-5 years?
3 to 5 years. I mean, it's kind of hard to say because, like, sometimes you put out a video and you gain, your subscribers go up like 200% in a few weeks. And sometimes you put out like 5 videos in a row and you gain 200 subscribers. So it's kind of hard to predict that. Short-term goal, if I can get to the point where I'm paying for the bills for myself and I have like enough on the side, my priority would be doing as much field work as possible. Right now, a lot of my videos are just me at home speaking to the camera and doing a lot of online research and putting up the sources of my research. And when I can film something in person, I'll do it, but I can't afford to do it. I can't always afford to do it. It's very frustrating for me when I see like something happening in the news and I'm like, if I had a reserve of 500 euros, I could just book a plane ticket and spend a week there, maybe, like depending on how expensive the country is, but some countries, like the Georgia protest from a few months ago, I was so frustrated not to be able to just like have the resources to book a plane ticket and go there. So that's the short-term goal is winning enough from the channel where I can afford to do like last minute breaking news expenses where I can just like, I get a news alert and like 10 minutes later, I have a plane ticket booked, my bags are packed and I'm out the door, that would be great. That also would require, because right now being basically on my own, Ida still is involved in the channel. She's the production manager here. She helps with a lot of the logistics of like planning and things like that. But right now there's so much time that I spend like researching the story and then writing and then recording it and then editing it, and the editing can be like 2-3 weeks at least. And if there's breaking news in the middle of that 2-3 weeks, sometimes I won't even see the news alert because I'm like in my bubble editing. Yeah. And even if I see the thing, is like, okay, do I ditch this project for like a week, meaning that there's not going to be like, it's going to delay the next video for another week while I go shoot that thing. And then I go shoot that thing. Do I prioritize the breaking news that's happening there? And how fast can I put a video together? While there's this thing that's waiting here that is getting less and less relevant with time, that's
the
difficult
hard thing,
decisions.
Right? And with YouTube, it's always the thing you want to create how's it called, always green kind of content.
Yeah, evergreen
content or breaking news, but the breaking news work now, but
it's not going to work in the long term. Yeah, I try to thread that needle and find the ones that are kind of in between. But if I were able to have where the channel were big enough that I can actually pay a full-time salary for an editor, or even like a half-time salary for an editor to be like, I like do the research, I shoot, I maybe do like a quick edit, and then I offload it to the editor, and then I'm free to
or at least the
breaking news.
graphics,
I can go there,
for example.
Exactly, like something like graphics. I would like to find someone who's both a data analyst, like political science data analyst, and a video editor, so that they could basically do like the advanced video editing things and like the graphics and the map animations, like find like, do the research to find the data to put in the maps for the animation, stuff like that, and like kind of have all of those like 15 different qualifications in a single person. And it would that would be amazing. I don't know how I can find someone like that, but that would be great. But the channel would need to go significantly, at least like more than 100,000 subscribers for me to even.
How's it called? This channel, huge if true.
Yeah, Cleo Abram, right?
Yeah.
I've exchanged a couple of emails with her.
Her channel is huge.
Yeah.
And with very few videos, but I'm always impressed that how long she has been in the game and how much traction she has.
Yeah.
Is like amazing. And they have released a new one, which is very similar. I don't remember the name, but same style of finding some interesting topic and making a whole journalist documentary or mini documentary about it.
I'd love to do an interview with her because so most of what I do is about politics, but I also like to talk about have conversations about journalism and how I get I have a video. My second video is about a different approach to journalism that is different from like the hyper neutral, hyper objective, news agency style journalism that we tend to think as being journalism, like the one kind of journalism. And I really like to talk with people about different philosophical approaches to journalism. And Huge is True would be an interesting conversation because the stated approach of her channel is to be optimistic about things and present positive stories. And I'm not saying that it's a bad approach, and clearly it's working, and I think it's a completely valid thing to want to put out feel good stories out there. But I would love to have a conversation about okay, how do you approach a story where you started to approach a story in a positive way, and then you realize halfway through that, oh, actually this is bullshit. Actually, this is a huge scam. Do you drop the story? Do you put it out in a negative way? Do you try to put a positive spin on it while pointing out that there's clearly some fundamental flaws with the approach of the thing that you're covering? Or I would love to have that conversation with her.
You know what I think also works very well? Because in this world, you need to have a certain level of, you need to be a little bit contrarian to where the flow is going.
Yeah.
And the flow of journalism or of news, of breaking news, is always towards the negative.
Yeah.
Something negative, a knife attack or whatever, and there's what the people clicks, and that's what everyone wants to do because it brings money. She goes against that flow, against the current, and she says, I'm going to focus on something that is positive, something that can be huge if true. And maybe that was one of the factors. It's no one else is doing this, I'm going to make it in a very interesting way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm not being critical of it. I think it's an interesting approach, but I guess it goes back to the title, Huge If True. What if
it's not true?
What happens if you find out that it's not true? Do you point that out? How do you point it out? Would be a conversation that I would like to have. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit of your next videos. What kind of videos do you have in mind? What kind of video would you like to do in the future, in the next month?
Okay, so right now, by the time this interview is out, I'll have a video on the AfD that I was supposed to publish right before the election. Something happened. I wasn't able to publish it in time, but it's coming out by the end of February. How much do I want to give away? I have a lot of videos that are just possibly because of the political context that we're in, that are about fascism in different countries, or the broader topic of fascism. Or there's one that I have about doing the list of all the far right parties in Europe and talking about what are their different what makes them far right, basically. What are their
cool,
which is a little bit of a difference. Having a list like that where I'm spending 2 minutes per party is not the kind of things that I've done before. So those are all very much in the same topic. Eventually I'm going to get burned out on fascism, but right now it's like the thing that is happening in politics in Europe. I would like to cover the environment and the climate crisis. I haven't done anything other than a few TikTok videos, Instagram reels on that. I haven't really done a proper video on that, and I would like to do things on like either activism or like cover some of the people affected by the yearly wave of wildfires that we're seeing happening in Europe and elsewhere at the moment, or even if a little bit further away from Europe we're seeing like, I don't know, villages that are having to like completely empty out because they're no longer in habitable regions of the earth or things like that. Those are topics that I would really like to cover. I have a plan to do not just one video, but like a series of videos. Like this would be like an ongoing topic that I would go back to on the intersection between new technologies and politics. Like, what are the political implications of some of the AI, like generative AI things that we've seen popped up? I've been wanting to do this one for like a couple of years at this point, and I've been so busy with the other videos that I haven't had time to do it. So it almost feels irrelevant at this point to talk about generative AI, but there's always new topics that are coming up. Ideas like, I don't know if this is going to become a video, but I don't know if you're aware of, I don't know if you know what adversarial pattern clothes are.
No.
So it's people who have invented types of clothing, like a hoodie or something, that has specific patterns on them that make you indetectable to AI cameras.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Like AI surveillance cameras, like they're not able. It's kind of like during World War I, the ships that were on the ocean had this really weird camouflage. I forget what it's called, but it was a way to like break up the shape of the ship so that people from very far away, or they would paint waves on the backside of the ship. Okay. So that it looked like the ship was going in this direction or this direction, like you didn't know where they were going, so you didn't know where to shoot your torpedoes. And also because of the painting that they had these crazy like patterns on the ships, where if there's like kind of like a zebra patterns where there's multiple ships next to each other, and you're not able to tell the different shapes apart. You don't know how many ships there are.
Interesting.
And so adversarial pattern clothes are something similar, where it's like you have a bunch of silhouettes on your hoodie, and the cameras aren't able to tell your shape. They're like completely confused by the clothing. And so those kinds of technologies are kind of like a response to the big brother technology that we're seeing. There's something called nightshade, which is poison for generative AI models that was developed by artists who were very annoyed that Midjourney and other image generating AI were stealing their work. Yeah. So they developed a thing where when they put one of their artworks online, they run it through something called Nightshade that basically corrupts the data of their image. And if that image gets scooped up in the AI algorithm and the AI like data gathering, it will, if enough Nightshade images get included in the training data set, it kind of poisons the algorithm, and it's no longer able to properly generated images.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things like that. Like, I love that kind of cat and mouse game of like adapting to these things that people are not.
But the day only has 24 hours.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to those, but yeah.
Stan, thanks a lot for being on the podcast and sharing your thoughts and your journey as a journalist or video journalist. If the people want to check out his videos, I will put the link in the description also so they can be aware of the next videos that are coming. Stan, thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much.